Hey, everybody. This is a special one for me, and it's somebody that I met 6 minutes ago, which is different than usual. And as you all know that are listeners, I do a lot of speaking with founders. Some of the founders have products that I've either never heard of or I'm just not in the market for. And when Richard and his team reached out, I said, holy cow, I have to talk to Richard. Richard is the CEO and founder of Fathom, AI NoteTaker, which happens to be a product that I've used since it's been in beta, which is amazing. So when I saw, my first thought, Richard, was the Fathom NoteTaker that I've been using. I'm like, I know this thing well. I use it all the time. And so I'm here with Richard today. I'm really glad you're here. And I maybe get to learn a little bit more about your process and about the company than just being an end user. So Richard, welcome. Again, Richard's the founder and CEO of Fathom AI.
Jason, thanks for having me.
Yeah. I'm going to say this, Richard. I'll make maybe a fun joke for those who get it. We are not recording this in Fathom and Zoom. We're actually recording this in another product for a specific reason. We're recording this in Riverside, and I'd suggest we record in Fathom. We're not going to do that because I usually use Riverside. We're here. So, Richard, I'd love to start out and just give the audience a little context on what Fathom is, and then we'll go back in history and talk about your journey to get there. But, in a nutshell, what is Fathom NoteTaker for those who don't know?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've never met anyone who likes trying to have a meeting on Zoom or Google Meet or Microsoft Teams and take notes at the same time, right? It's probably one of everyone's least favorite things to do. Certainly was mine before I started Fathom about 5 years ago. And so we kind of thought, gosh, this is back in 2020. We thought, gosh, we think AI is going to get really good. And we think everyone hates taking notes. So why don't we make a free product that just sits in your meetings, records it, transcribes it, and takes notes for you, so you can just focus on having a great conversation and not trying to be a court stenographer as well as a salesperson or founder or what you name it. So so that's what we set out to do, and it's been pretty successful. Again, thanks for being an early beta user. We had fantastic early beta users that gave us a lot of great feedback, and also spread the word about Fathom to their friends and their colleagues and whatnot. And so it's been a really fun ride, honestly.
Yeah.
And I think we've kind of proven out that, no one likes taking notes, and they're super excited to have a product do it for them. Especially one, do it for free.
The next iteration is my Fathom robot that comes to an in-person meeting and takes notes for me. I am the perfect user for something like this. I hate taking notes in any context, whether it be Zoom, person. I'm not a good note taker. I don't like it. I know that I can't be fully present. So when you all come out with your physical thing that goes into a meeting, and I mean, actually you can do that, right? You can open up a Zoom and say, hey, we're going to record this. No problem.
We are looking to that. I have the same problem where it's like people, want to meet in person. I'm like, can we not? Because I don't remember. It's almost like it didn't happen. Like, that muscle has atrophied so much for me that I'm just not used to scribing even an in-person conversation. So
so cool. Well, let's start back with your history of what's gotten you to the founder and CEO of Fathom. What's your background and where did you come from prior to this?
Yeah, so I was originally a computer science graduate. So early in my career was an engineer. I was a very classic founder engineer. It's like, kind of a crappy engineer. Like I can get stuff out pretty quickly, but it's not even remotely bulletproof. Early in my career kind of transitioned over doing product design. And when I did that, it's actually when I started working with a company in the first batch of Y-Combinator called Kiko. And we shared a room in Cambridge with like Reddit and some other folks. And so that was kind of a cool entree into a really rich vein of entrepreneurs that were out here in San Francisco, where I live now. Yeah. And so that kind of got me really focused on starting cool software companies. I started this company called User Voice, which was a platform for product feedback. Did that for a long time. Did that for about 10 years. And really, I call that like my finishing school for entrepreneurship, because it was a good, not great company, like pretty reasonably successful, but like we had to work for every inch, if you will, right? And so we really had to get good at execution, and it gave me opportunity to branch out from not just doing product and design, but to like running the sales team for a minute, running the marketing team for a minute. Like, so it made me, I think, a kind of a very T-shaped kind of entrepreneur, right? Where I can do all the disciplines. Obviously, I go deep on product design and engineering, but I know now enough to be dangerous across all of these. And those learnings were, I think, super impactful and helpful when it came time to start Fathom.
Nice. There's a lot of things I want to dig in on there. And the first thing is, And I always ask a founder this: when did you know that you were going to found a company?
I was very fortunate in that I grew up with, my parents were divorced, and both my stepdad and my father were both entrepreneurs.
Okay, yeah.
And so I kind of grew up with this like default assumption. That's what you did. I remember I sold pictures to kids in first grade class. And, and then in high school, I was selling like fake Oakleys that I got from my brother in New York City, shipped them down to me.
Heck, I had fake Oakleys. Absolutely.
Yeah. Sold like mixtapes, burned CDs. So I was always doing something kind of on my own. I think early in my career, I was an employee at a couple companies as a software engineer. And I realized I'm a terrible employee.
Yeah.
I just, I don't take direction well. You really got to explain the why to me for me to do it. But I'm a really good founder. Like I'm really self-motivated kind of person. So yeah, I think it was very fortunate that I was just surrounded by kind of entrepreneurship. And I think I grew up in North Carolina. I think the biggest challenge I had there is outside of my family, there wasn't it was really hard for me to get friends and colleagues to want to, start startups because everyone was just so happy to I kind of like having a salary and, a car and a house and stuff. Perfectly legitimate things to want. And so then when I got into this Y-Combinator group, which, everyone kind of knows Y-Combinator now, but at that point, no one knew what that was. But I was all of a sudden, I found my tribe. I found all the other people that, wake up every morning and want to build something. And, I think that intersection of personal background desire and finding the right group of people was super impactful.
Yeah. You also mentioned the founder. One of the many founder dilemmas is being really good, and especially a technical founder. Passion is product design, engineering, and then one day you find yourself having to have sales conversations or having to have HR conversations, doing it all. I'm curious if you'd share with us, how did that go when you started? Because most technical founders I know, they hate sales. They want to get into the product and do the thing, and then and then the technical details should sell itself, or the value should sell itself. And now that you've had a lot of experience, it doesn't. Some of those things still don't matter. I'm so curious, what you've learned about that for other founders listening. That maybe a lesson you can impart is, somebody, and we're talking about how you've raised some capital and you've had a lot of success with Fathom, that you've managed to do that and then eventually build a pretty decent sized team.
Yeah, I mean, I think UserVoice and Fathom, very different companies, right? Your first startup, you got to do everything yourself. It was fall asleep with your laptop writing code. Fathom's a little bit different, right? Because I had a somewhat successful company before, and so I got to start with 4 great engineers, and I, in month 3, hired my best salesperson, sort of thing. But, so I would say, if I think about kind of more my UserVoice experience, I think it's more applicable to a lot of folks if you're a first-time founder. I think there's a lot of, the biggest thing you have to overcome is getting your own head about these things, right? Especially if you're a technical founder, it's easy to be I don't know how to do sales. I don't want to do sales. I don't like doing things I'm not good at. And I got to find someone to do this. And I think as you then watch people do it, you're it's not, to do it super well is takes, 10,000 hours, but you can do it. Right. And I think a lot of my friends that were the most successful ones were the ones who were in their 20s and early 30s, but they had almost the hubris to be I can do anything, right? I can go do sales for us. I can figure out our marketing, right? And I think one of the things I reflect on is that I often get very in my head, and I'd spend a lot of time trying to find an expert to teach me how to do X or Y or Z.
Sure.
And I would actually move a lot slower than my peers because of that, right? I think it was only once I figured it out, gosh, don't wait for perfect, right? Perfect's the enemy of good. Don't wait to find, yes, there's someone who's a better marketer or someone better salesperson out there than me, but it's going to take me time to find them, ramp them up. We don't have time for that. Speed is everything in startups. And I can, even if I do a crappy job, it's still better than the alternative, sort of thing. And so I think that was my lesson for the first company. And then for Fathom, my lesson was more let's build a company that actually plays to my strengths, right? Which is, UserVoice started off as this freemium product and then evolved into an enterprise product. And I was much better running the freemium company. It played to my strengths around user experience and product design. And so for Fathom, we kind of had this thing we're going to just focus. We're not even trying to sell anything for 2-3 years. We're just going to try to make an awesome product that people use day in, day out. And actually my sales leader that I brought in, I told her, I was you're actually not going to sell anything for 2 years. I just want you here, and you're going to act like a customer success person, and you're just going to help everyone and become a product expert. And at some point, we're going to have something for you to sell. This is a tough pitch to a salesperson.
I was going to say, I mentioned,
you have to have
like,
high
wait,
trust.
what?
Yeah. I'm very fortunate. Her name's Amanda. Like, worked with her at User Voice.
Yeah.
And I developed a lot of high trust. And so that's one of the advantages of being a second time. You can go grab someone and say, hey, look, I need you to do this. It's a little different than what you normally work on, but just trust me and we're going to get there, sort of thing. So,
brilliant.
So I think Fathom is like, we play to my strengths, right? We go find, we build a business model that is the one I want to wake up every day and work in.
You say something you said there reminds me. I was in a conversation yesterday with some founders and they were supporting somebody and the topic was remote versus in person and how they're getting, I don't know if this is something that you all have dealt with or not. And they have a company about the same size as Fathom and they're struggling with the decision on it because they're getting their venture back. They have some people saying, hey, you should do this. They also, like, the founder doesn't love in-person work for a variety of reasons, partially for their own lifestyle.
Yep.
And they've had a really successful company. And somebody else in the group said something that really resonated with me, that it's another way of saying what you just said. They said, remember, as a founder, your business is always a reflection of you and how you see things, your energy, your vibe. You're bringing in your own, and they said it was brilliant. It's like you bring in your own mindsets, including your limited mindsets. You bring in all of these things. And that was just such a good reminder to me. And you said it, you're like, oh, this is more of a reflection of who I am, my strengths. And when you're trying to do everything or you're doing something that you're not passionate about, like, whether or not you say it, your vibe is going to give it off. As humans, we're just designed to do that.
I think in a lot of these decisions you make about, what's our target market? What's our product? Are we in person? Are we remote? I actually don't think there's generally any wrong answers, right?
Yeah.
All of them are fine. The only wrong answer is to kind of like not commit to one direction and to kind of like hesitate. Maybe we'll do something in between. And also to do something like you don't want to do because it will be obvious to everyone. Like, I think User Voice started off as remote and then we built an office, then we built a second office. And I spent half my life traveling between these offices. And at some point, Fathom was like, why did I do that? Like, I don't like even working I'm not even that effective in an office. I'm much more effective when I have my own focused time, my own space. And so with Fathom, we were like committed from the early days, like, we're going to be a remote company. And, because that's the company I want to live in. It's like, I've talked to other founders that are like, oh, what's the biggest thing you regret? They're like, well, we put our office, 40-minute commute from my house. Why, they're like, why did I do
totally
that? Why don't I build the thing I want to live in, sort of thing. It's your house, right? So build the house you want to live in, not the house someone tells you should be building, right?
Yeah. And that was a big part of that conversation and this was specifically about some venture capital folks that had invested in their A with, like, you need to be this, you need to do that. Right. And they said, everybody's going to have an opinion, but it's not their company. And they're investors, and you listen and you're respectful. And what ends up happening there, I'm sure, and it probably happened for you as well, is you end up resenting your own business. And boy, what a terrible place to be. Because I say, if you're going to resent what you do for a living, go work for somebody else and let them pay you to do that, as opposed to like having your.
Yeah. The whole point we do this is so that we have
the whole point to do this is to make it your own.
Yeah. I mean, I think you see this a lot too with like enterprise sales, where there's generally you raise money, there's a lot of pressure to be like, okay, time to go up market. You got to go sell enterprise sales and stuff. Or I see founders who, don't love doing sales and pick a business or a market that forces them to start doing enterprise sales from day one. Like, why did you do that? It doesn't play to your strengths, right? Well, that's what our investor said we need to do. It's like, if you're doing something because someone else tells you to do it, your heart's never going to really be in it, right?
Yeah.
So.
I have an adage in life I like to say, Richard, is find me somebody who really likes being told what to do. There's very few of us, especially those of us who like high performing or like have some ideas about, and especially people that are creative. Like, you're obviously a very creative individual as well as a great technical person. We don't like being told what to do.
Yeah.
Let's talk about building teams. Any lessons that you want to share with us? And you've scaled Fathom quite substantially, and if people want to look into that, you can probably find it online. But you've had to grow from some founder-led sales and some small teams to a real not a real company, but a company with all departments and doing all sorts of things. What are some of the things that you've had to learn / overcome as you've scaled, specifically as the founder?
I mean, I think the classic one is just like which of your Legos to give away, sort of thing, right? And I think you're always probably a little late giving them away too, right? Like you stay engaged in things a little too long. I think the failure mode I see the most. At least that was the case for me. I think it's so different when you're doing your first start versus like your second one to a certain degree. Like with we were about a year ago, we were about 15 people. We're about 70 now, and
huge growth.
Of those 15 people, I think about 2/3 of them were people I'd worked with before. And the other third were the other folks had worked with before. It was all in network, right? And
nice.
So, I mean, I think that is such a huge, huge hack. And I think you can access this early in your career, but than I did. But like finding folks that you've worked with before or folks you've worked with have worked with sort of thing is like, it's such a hack because it's so hard to vet. So hard to have that shotgun wedding of recruiting, especially at the early stage, right? Like just meeting someone you don't know and running through a recruiting process and having it work out is hard. It's got a high failure rate.
Yeah.
So I think, and I also think it's like, the other thing you can get kind of seduced by is like having a big team feels fun. Right? Everyone's like, because every investor's like, how big's your team? And you go to some cocktail party with a bunch of entrepreneurs. Everyone first question, because no one will say what their revenue is, right? That's like
no, of course not. Yeah.
So the safe vanity metric for everyone is, well, how big's Fathom? How big's your team? And so then you subconsciously start thinking that that's also the like metric of success.
Yeah.
I actually try to hire as little. I like worst things like we hire almost reticently. Like we try not to hire because every additional person makes us move a little bit slower.
Sure.
And I think most of my friends have very fortunate to be around people that have been very successful, built really big companies, ones that have gotten acquired, gone public, you name it. And they all talk about it with a twinkle in their eye. When you tell them, oh, we're 15 people, we're 20 people, they're like, oh, it's the best. Don't ever leave. Don't ever grow. You hear that all the time. So I think there's something to be said for staying in that zone a long time because you can be really efficient with 15 people. I mean, Fathom was, we now had to grow the team to hit our new goals.
Yeah.
That's right. But I think a lot of people scale the team too early. And I remember talking to my friend Michael Seibel, who's one of the partners at YC, and I was like, we just raised a Series A and we had like 4 engineers. Like, we need 12 engineers. And he's like, do you really? He's like, you seem like you got pretty far with 4. Like, why do you immediately need 12? And I was
love that. Yeah.
Fair point. Right. So, I think, so our lessons have been figure out what things you want to focus on, what not. If you've got folks in network, bring them in. I'm also a big fan of like, go with the people you got there with, right? Like there's also this tendency to bring in big execs and whatnot. I'd much rather promote from within folks that really understand our culture, that get it, like that can train the next generation of folks. So I think that's been my biggest lesson learned for Fathom is there's a lot like building the product kind of is the first thing you have to do.
Sure.
But once you get some success, now you're shifting in the company building and it's a whole different game to play.
I want to dig in on there's so many things. I'll tell you, Richard, as you were saying that, you were talking about Reddit. I'm just thinking about the CEO of Reddit's like, I really can't go out with my family anymore because my wife is too famous and my company is all these things. And like, that there's probably something to be said for those days when you're like in the code and doing the things and like, hey, we want to add this feature. How long is that going to take? 3 days of coding overnight or whatever. And like, just do it. Yep. And having the money is great too, right? Like there's both those things. First thing I want to talk a little bit about is enterprise moving up market. I know you all have moved up market. When I first started, I didn't even think about it. I just knew I was the perfect target market for the beta, and then immediately became a paid customer that this is really valuable, like no brainer. I shouldn't tell you this. I'd probably pay a lot more for it, but
that's great. Don't worry. We hear that a lot. I think I actually got it.
Richard's like, can we have an announcement to make? We're tripling our price for anybody who said, no, I'm kidding.
It's funny. I got an email from one of our investors this morning, be like, I've got this other founder who uses Fathom and loves it and doesn't pay for it. And, has some ideas for how you can, I was like, that's cool. We don't need you to pay more for it. Like we're totally happy giving the thing away for free and being very generous with it. That's part of our model. So
yeah, absolutely.
Don't worry.
So the first thing is moving up market and going into selling to businesses. Mm-hmm. Curious how, like any lessons learned there in that road, and what would you say to somebody else who's listening, who's got a similar product that works great for a solopreneur or even like an individual, like I'm sure Fathom is used like a school board meeting. Like there's a million places you can use technology like this. And then suddenly you're calling on Fortune 500 where they have procurement departments and IT departments. And how does this fit into our tech stack? Like what are some lessons that you've learned and you and the team have learned about moving up market?
So I'd say the one thing, there's a handful of things I think we got really right. And one of them was, I'm a big fan of like attack, like key kind of metrics in order. Like don't do multiple things at once. And so for us, in the beginning, it was like, we don't care about anything other than making a product that individuals will use day in, day out, right? And I don't need a big number of folks, but I'm not going to worry about onboarding. I'm not going to worry about monetizing. I'm only just going to focus on free user retention. And I think in the early days, I probably personally reached out to my network and manually onboarded. It was a really messy process, like 600, 800 people, until I got to a cohort of like 50 people that kind of stuck with it every week. And that took us almost a year to get to that point.
Yeah.
And then we said, great, okay, we feel good about this. Now let's focus on how do we get better at onboarding, right? How do we make it easier for you to kind of become a user and make the onboarding process really good? And then once we get to that, we're like, okay, now we'll focus on like, how do we make it easy for you to refer Fathom? And then only then, if we get through that, we'll start thinking about like, how do we make money off this? And we always have this thesis that we don't need to make money off individual users. We will make money when someone wants to set this up for their whole team. And they're like, oh, I want all my meetings in one workspace so that I can create all these workflows and automations. And so I was very adamant with the team early on, like anyone gives you feedback about, hey, I want features to use as a team. We don't care about that yet. We want to be laser focused on just making the product awesome, like really, really amazing for the people on the meetings that are using this to take their notes.
Yeah.
And so I think that worked out really well because I think if you don't do that, you end up kind of like, I see a lot of people that are like, they launch and they're trying to figure out like retention and activation and monetization all at the same time. It's really, really hard to do three things well at once. And so I'm a big fan of like do it in serial. And so we did that. And then I also think once we started monetizing, as I mentioned, I brought in, I think at this point we had 3 salespeople that weren't selling. And at some point we said, great, now we can start selling. All right, here's our team edition product. Start talking to folks. And, we were talking in the beginning, very small companies. And now we're talking to much larger companies.
Sure.
I would say you get this pressure like, oh, when are you guys going to go up market? You should go up market. I was like, we don't really go up market.
Yeah.
What we've noticed is that up market comes to us.
Totally.
And so if you often start with like this, like early users or early adopters that are small companies, that are solo entrepreneurs, and they're the best people to start with. They'll give you great feedback like yourself. They'll be really engaged. They'll tell their friends. And then just kind of organically, you'll see larger companies come to the party. Like they'll hear about these things and they're never, your Fortune 500 is never the first people to adopt the thing, right? No. And so all we said is like, we're just going to be aware of that, as we kind of boil this frog, as the up market comes to us, what features they need for us to be able to close them is more what we looked at, right? And so there's a handful of things that, okay, if you want to sell to a 200-person company, you're going to need SOC 2 and this and this and this. Great. If you want to get a 500-person company, you now need SSO and SCIM and da-da-da-da. And so I actually think the worst thing you can do is, and I see this a lot too, where it's like, oh, it's great for user base. We got great metrics, but our VCs are not pushing us. Like we need to make a lot more money and we make money with enterprise and we're going to throw away all existing users and just start doing some outbound to these folks that never used this before. And it's like, you just threw away the one thing that was working. So don't abandon or these companies happen a lot where they raise their prices, right? And they price themselves out of that early market. And that's when a new startup comes in and takes that market over and then they come up from underneath you. So I think it's super important for us to like, we don't leave our core, our original audience. We just kind of stack newer audiences on top of that, right?
Yeah. I don't know if this is a term that's used in this space. And I haven't been in the space in a while, but I used to work at a couple of cybersecurity startups. We would call this, for the security people we'd sell to, the Dropbox problem. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've ever heard that term before.
Yep.
Yeah, it's where like, oh, wow, this is and it can be any cloud storage, but cloud storage, when it came out, was like, wow, this is super useful. And I'm going to do it on and my wife works at big tech where they have their own solution now. She used to use Dropbox and put pretty sophisticated intellectual property in a Dropbox, and then suddenly their IT department's like, no. I'm sure the same thing has probably happened with you all as people are they're installing Fathom from the Zoom store, and I know Zoom didn't used to have as many controls or install, and then they go, oh, this is super useful, and I'm sure this has happened to you all. you're like, oh, the CRO is using it. You're like, yes, because the CRO is going to have budget to roll it out to his or her sales team. Then you go, but IT goes, no, we got our data in the cloud. We don't know what people are talking about. And I used to sell the financial services. So I know there's all sorts of additional things with the really regulated industry. But it sounds like you've had a similar experience where people are using it and it's great. And then these companies go, oh, how do I control this in a way that feels good and also gives my users their freedom to use the solutions they want? Is that so? It's almost like a pull. It's almost like a pull thing, which is just an amazing place to be as a company like yours.
And then, I mean, my old philosophy is always like, if we do our monthly metrics with the team, revenue is actually my number 4 priority. And it's below usage, because I always say, like, if you have a product people are using day in, day out, you will almost always find a way to monetize it. That's the hard part. Like, and I think a lot of folks get hung up on it. I know there's a lot of like startup advice, like charge early and often, make sure you're solving a real pain. I don't actually believe in that. I actually think for most products, like just getting people to use it proves that you've got a real pain. And like in 2025, I think that logic made more sense 15 years ago when there weren't that many software companies out there.
Yeah.
There's a million of them now.
Yeah.
And so you get like one chance to make a good first impression and break through and become something people use regularly. Now, this is very specific advice to a product like ours, right? If you've got some enterprise product that only gets used once a month and it's a compliance product, throw everything I said. But if you're building something that your ideal user should be using this every day or every week, then I always think that's the hard part to get to. You get people using something habitually, everything else gets way easier. Yeah.
Speaking from my personal experience, I remember when you turned on the paid switch, it was like, it was like the conversion. We don't need to get into conversion metrics, but I'll bet you your conversion rate was probably higher than a lot of other products in a space like this in terms of you're already using it. It's already in your workflow. You know, it's valuable. And for, like you said, I don't know many people that are like, I love taking paper notes or typing notes on a screen, where you're like, oh, wait, you mean there's a solution that isn't as good, but I love this one and it does all these things. That's worth significant resource and to most people that I know. And, you've probably heard this feedback a lot. I do a lot of trainings, and like the group I was with yesterday, we had 3 Fathom NoteTakers I had to remove from the meeting before it even started.
Like, good sign.
I'm like, oh yeah, we got to press remove because it was a confidential meeting. We're like, we actually can't. We don't record these meetings. And it was funny because they're like, yeah, we don't want to record these. I'm like, that 3 out of the 5 of you had your Fathom NoteTaker here before you showed up.
Yeah, our conversion rate actually is pretty good. I don't think it's world class because we focus so much on making the free product. Like, I think there's a lot of companies that try to make the free product, something you can't actually use forever, right? I mean, that's the game everyone tries. Oh yeah,
like Zoom.
40-minute
meeting. You're like, that's not useful,
right? And so I think consumers are pretty savvy to this now, and they're pretty skeptical of things that have. If it's got a free tier, everyone knows the company's like, oh, it's not really free. It's a trick, right? It's like a bait and switch. But we work really hard to make sure you can use this legitimately for free forever. Yeah, it won't have all the bells and whistles, but it'll certainly solve the core problem, right? Of taking notes for you and things like that. So it is interesting. But yeah, it's funny because when the market shifted about 2 years ago, 2022, 2023, we went from this world where everyone cared about usage, everyone cared about revenue, and we were still out there being like, we still just care about usage. Revenue will come, sort of thing. And so that actually was a challenge in fundraising because people were so focused now on you have to be profitable and you've got to make a bunch of money, right? Yeah. That's the opposite of the playbook we're running, where we're like, let's go get a bunch of users, even free users, and get them to love it, get them to tell their friends. I mean, it's a unique product too. You bring it into your meetings, so you naturally share it with other people. And so I think that's where the value of free is. I honestly, like, a lot of times, I'd rather you be on free, because if you're on free, you're actually more likely to do nice things for us, like tell your friends or write a review for us, than if you pay me $10 a month and you kind of like, I've given you $10 a month, I don't owe you anything, sort of thing. I'm a big fan of the power of free. Yeah,
you just reminded me, Richard, or just sparked that for me. What a viral marketing campaign is. Oh, here comes a Fathom NoteTaker. And I remember like, what's a Fathom NoteTaker? What does that thing do? And I remember when I first saw it 3 years ago, I was in a mastermind I was in. I think it was when you first came out, and it's like, hey, I'm testing out this new thing. I'm like, what does it do? And they actually explained it. And I'm like, oh, that sounds useful. And it was because I asked them, like, what's that thing?
I mean, that's like, 70% of our, sign up stream is that, right? It's like,
Yeah.
you'd have to explain what this thing is in your meeting, and naturally it turns into a sales pitch, right?
Yeah.
If we do our job well, right? So,
yeah. I want to cover off on a couple more things before we wrap. One,
sure.
love to talk about, and I'll give them, and we'll cover them in any order you see fit. I want to talk about raising capital. Always something my audience likes to hear about. You have successfully raised capital. And the other thing I want to talk about, maybe actually let's do that first. And then I want to wrap by talking about what do you see as what's next in the space that you live in? Because AI is obviously everywhere and you live in a very specific way of using AI. I'm curious. I'm not asking for the product roadmaps. We're like, what do you see as what's next for the kind of way that Fathom does things? So yeah, let's start with raising capital. Curious to hear your experience with how that went for you and any lessons learned and mindsets that you went through, because I don't know what the statistics are now, but what is it about? I think 65 to 70 pitches to get capital. And you also have to have a product that people actually want to, like people will pitch that the market never materializes. So yeah, anything you'd want to share with the audience and for you and I about your experience raising capital? Yeah,
it's everyone's favorite topic. I always hesitate to talk about this too much because we did stuff that's so different than I think most people do.
Okay.
And I'm not sure how reproducible it is. So I always give this kind of caveat. So
yeah,
I'll work backwards. So we raised a Series A last year, $17 million. But before that, we'd raised about $10 million.
Mm-hmm.
But we did that over like 7 rounds, quote unquote rounds, if you will.
Wow. Yeah.
But nothing was traditional. So we were basically raising, I think the average, we had like 100 people on the cap table. I think over that $10 million, I think the average check size was like $75K.
Yeah.
And this is a kind of intentional process. Like, I hate fundraising. I hate let's build the deck. Let's talk to 50 people. I find it really distracting. I find it kind of demoralizing because you get a bunch of people that just don't get it. And I've got to convince you of something.
And you're going to hear no. Statistically, you're going to hear no a lot. No, who likes to hear no?
Yeah. I do like, what I like about fundraising is I like having smart people poke holes in my business. Yeah. I actually find that really interesting. But they're like, let's go spend a month of my, a month or 2 months of my time being completely distracted and not focused on the business. I hate that part. So we did something a little bit different. And I think it's a little harder to execute this maybe in this market because, again, we started in 2020, which is pretty frothy. And I had done a previous business and got to about 10 million in revenue. So and I had a big network of folks. But what we did in the beginning was, I think when we first started, we raised $500K from friends and family, basically angels. And then 3 months later, we got into YC, and then we raised $1 million we got into YC. And then we got, I think 4 months later, or 5 months later, we got the demo day for YC and we raised 1.5. And then 6 months after that, we raised another 1.5. And so a couple of things were interesting. We did nothing but small checks. So I did different things. I probably did 30 meetings, but my win rate was 75, 80%. And so I just kept stacking small checks.
And was your ask in those meetings a small check? Was that by design?
For the most part, yeah. For the most part, I wasn't going after institutionals. I was setting my own price and I was going to get people. Part of this was intentional. I think in the early days, I felt like I didn't want just one seed fund to give me one feedback. I was like, I actually want a big coalition of people that have different perspectives, right? So I had a bunch of folks that had a background in engineering, a bunch of folks that had a background in design. At some point, one round, we got nothing but folks that had a focus on they were all sales tech CEOs. And so whatever and so at some point, we need a connection to Zoom. We need a connection to Slack. I could just go to this audience of about 50 to 100 people. And it was really useful to me. It was just kind of this, it was pretty lightweight, but it was this big network of folks we could call on. The other nice thing about it, again, is I just could kind of raise money whenever we need to, but we were also pretty smart about, we would raise whenever we had pull. So it's some event just happened. We just got into YC. Oh, someone heard about that and they want to invest. Great. Let's use that to catalyze around. Because I think the hardest thing when you're fundraising is to create a sense of urgency and create what we call in sales that critical event. And in this case, we just waited till a critical event happened, and then we would quickly kind of coalesce around that to raise money. The other thing that happens, we never had more than 12 months of runway. Up until our Series A, we never had more than 12 months of runway. And I saw that as a feature, not a bug, where I was I only work well under pressure. I know that about myself.
Sure.
And so I have such high confidence in this product because I use it myself and it's changed how I work that, if we need more than 12 months of runway at a given point, if we run out of money, fine. I want to fail or succeed quickly. I don't want to be here plugging away for 4 years if it's not working, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So
brilliant.
I don't know. It's not exactly the most reproducible strategy. And then for even our Series A, we didn't run a process. Like, we had a firm come to us. They already knew about us. I talked to 2 or 3 firms, but I didn't run a process. They gave me a deal that I could live with, and I got back to work.
Amazing.
So, yeah. So I think it's a different construction, very different than I think your standard roadshow kind of way. But
sure.
Again, it played well to our strengths.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. That's it. That is definitely not the normal story, which is that's really interesting it's interesting that you went out and you wanted a lot of interesting things there. One thing that I'm really interested in, we don't have time for it today, is like collecting the small checks, like making that on purpose, building a big cap table with a bunch of names with small stakes, because a lot of people, that's not what they want.
Yeah. My other thesis is like, I think often if you get an angel putting in $50K, they actually sometimes care more about your outcome than $2 million out of a slush fund from some VC that has $2 billion under management, right?
Yeah.
So when we did get institutionals, and we have some institutionals, I also intentionally only found institutional investors, VCs, that were generally like on their first or second fund. They were still trying to prove it.
Nice. Yeah.
And so I found all that to be useful. We also raised money from our users. We raised about $3 million from our users as well. We did one round that was just users, and part of our Series A, we did 10% of that round for users. And so we've done every non-traditional kind of fundraising you can imagine.
I love the creativity. Yeah, let's talk next. What do you see what's next you can keep it broad in AI, or really narrow it down to kind of where you see Fathom going. What do you see as what's next for all of us out here?
Well, I'll back up a little history. So, we started in 2020, and there were no LLMs in 2020, right? And so
also, good timing for a NoteTaker for virtual meetings.
Yeah, that too. So we had this thesis that like we thought LLMs were going to get really good, which was kind of counterintuitive. You go back to 2020. We had this other thesis that we thought transcription at the time was pretty expensive. We thought that it was going to basically approach zero very quickly, and so thus we can give away this NoteTaker for free. And we kind of thought like, we're going to really work on the hard parts, which is like making it reliably record, make it easy to use. At some point, AI will show up, and we'll just get to basically drop that into the existing system, right? And the AI part, in a lot of ways, is some of the easiest parts of building a product like Fathom. The hard part is reliable transcriptions and reliable recording and storage and distributed systems and all that sort of fun stuff. And so really, it's funny because, we had these hypotheses, and, I think it's easy to be directionally correct. And we got a little lucky on timing. All the stuff happened right when we needed it to, right? Transcription became free right when we needed it to become free, or else we would have been bankrupt. And AI really showed up kind of late 2023 in a way where it was like, the AI can now write notes better than you can for an individual meeting. And so I'm kind of giving that context, like where we're excited now is like AI is at a point where it can do really awesome things for you on a single transcript, right? So it's like, I can basically give you a ChatGPT interface for your meeting. It'll write your follow-up emails. It'll answer any questions you have about that meeting, whether you were on it or you're just some colleague sent it to you. It can write the notes. It can find the action items, everything you'd want. What we're looking at now is how do we now do this for a big group of meetings? How do we look across all the sales meetings you had in the last quarter, or all of the stand-ups you had last year? How do we start giving you insight across lots of meetings? Help me find every moment where there was an objection that our sales team didn't handle well, or someone was asking about this integration that we don't have. And now we're getting to the point where AI can do that kind of stuff, right? It's kind of like I think for a while people wanted that to exist, and it turns out you couldn't just throw 10,000 hours of transcripts into ChatGPT and it do anything useful. But we're now getting to a point where that is possible. And so we're really excited about what you can do when you've got an AI that has sat in every meeting that you've been in, and every meeting that your team's been in, and can answer you any question you have about those meetings. We've always had this thesis that a lot of information in any organization is really only in these meetings, right? Think about it.
Absolutely.
Way more than what's in your email or in your Slack or whatnot. And so that's the thing we're really excited to unlock for folks, is really making the second brain for you, where you just even more have meetings, and you don't not only have to remember what happened in an individual meeting, you don't have to remember anything. You just ask questions. Wait, I know I had this conversation. Where was it? Who else had it? Et cetera, et cetera. So it's pretty exciting stuff.
That is very exciting. Richard, to wrap up before we talk a little bit more about where people can take a look at Fathom, and obviously I'm a personal fan. How do you use it with your team? How does the exec team at Fathom use Fathom?
I mean, we use it every meeting. I mean, I think what's fun about this product is you have a bunch of use cases. Obviously, the sales team uses it, right? And we use it a lot for sharing knowledge about what we're hearing from, as we talk about going up market, right? Like, oh, this customer had this challenge. Great. Send me the highlight of them discussing this challenge, right? Or now let's use the new Fathom search that we're beta testing and find me how many times this has ever happened. Let's watch all those clips. So a lot of kind of market intelligence we use it for on the sales team. We use it a lot in recruiting. So, someone has an intro call with a intro screen with someone. The next person in that kind of screening process will watch that recording, and they'll kind of because I think a lot of recruiting is, if you're a candidate, you have to get to ask the same 80% of questions every step of the process. And so it's very easy now to be like, oh, I talked to Sarah. The conversation was great. A few things were interesting conversations we should double click on in the next conversation. So that's super cool. And then obviously for internal meetings, right? Like, people can't make every meeting. I think there's a lot of meeting inflation, especially in remote companies. And so you can kind of almost in some ways, Fathom allows you to take meetings and make them async. And so it's like, oh, totally, make this meeting, or you don't necessarily need to be invited to every recurring marketing meeting we have. Hey, Tim, you're not on the recurring marketing meeting, but we talked about something you should see. So here's the link to that meeting. So I think it really allows you to be a much more efficient remote company in a lot of ways.
And I had a feeling you were going to go there. And the question I was going to ask that you answered was, do you have a culture now where people can say, hey, I can't make the meeting, I could make it, but it doesn't feel like the high impact thing I'm doing today?
Right.
Man, you want to talk about an easy sales pitch. Tell people, hey, this product helps you to be in less meetings that you were in before. Done. Very cool.
I legitimately think that's where we're going, right? I think we're
totally.
Everyone says everyone hates meetings. They don't actually hate meetings. What they hate is they hate all the busy work that comes with meetings, the pre-work, post-work, and they hate being in meetings where only 10% of that content is relevant to them. And with Fathom, we're going to be able to solve both of those problems, right? We're already solving a lot of the first one, and you can manually solve the second one. And I think a lot of the AI we're building next will kind of automate that, right? Where you can just know, hey, make sure Jason saw this last discussion we have, and it'll immediately tell you about it, sort of thing. So I think we're going to enter this world where, this is one of the best problem surfaces to apply modern LLMs. It just it's right up the fairway for what LLMs are good at doing.
Yeah. I'll share with you my favorite thing is, what are my action items and when are they due by? Ask it that. So good. They're like, oh yeah, I forgot that they said this thing, or they said it as they ran out. They left Zoom and ran out, and and dropped that in there. Like, oh no, and actually get a to-do list with not only the to-dos but when they're due by. Or hey, and I do coaching work and facilitation work. Oh, that person had committed to getting that other person the thing, so it's not actually mine. But I'd say, Richard, just to remind you, you had agreed to send Sam, the deck that you used to raise capital, whatever it is. So, Richard, thank you so much for being on. I've been looking forward to this conversation ever since it came my way. Let's talk a little bit about just the wrap here. I know a lot of people know you in the space. They want to try it out. What's the best way? And I'm going to give this to you. I have a way that I hook it in, but what's the best way for people to check it out?
Yeah, just go to Fathom.video, sign up. It's free. You'll get set up in a few minutes. You can use it. If you're listening to this now, you can use it on your next meeting. And I'm on LinkedIn. I've got this weird kind of bitmap avatar on LinkedIn, but just Richard White on LinkedIn for Fathom. Yeah. Anything you love or hate in that experience, let me know. I'm all ears. So yeah, love feedback from other founders and entrepreneurs.
Awesome. It's also in the Zoom App Store. If you go in, you have an approved app, which says a lot, because I know Zoom vets any partner that's going to be in there has to, which is probably a bit of a pain if you're a partner, but for those consumers hey, I need a thing, you're all in there as well. Yep. Awesome, Richard. We will make sure that all of Richard's information and the Fathom.video information is in the show notes. Thank you so much. As a user, I can't wait to see what you all come out with next to make my life even easier. I'll leave it with this. I was just telling somebody else, I'm a big AI guy. My dream for years has been to be Tony Stark. Wake up in the morning and talk to some thing in the sky and have it do all the things I don't want to do. And note taking is right at the top of my list. So thank you. Thank you for creating an awesome product.
We're on it, Jason. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Richard.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Talking to Cool People with Jason Frizzell. If you enjoyed today's episode, please tell your friends. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook and give us a shout out, or take a moment to leave a review on iTunes. If something from today's episode piqued your interest and you'd like to connect, email us at podcast@jasonfrizzell.com. We love hearing from our listeners because you're cool people too.